Hey, joining me this morning here on the Pulse of New Hampshire, a couple of great actors who are performing in the Ogunquit Playhouse at the Music Hall presentation of $1 Million Quartet. It's all about Elvis Presley, Carl Perkins, Jerry Lee Lewis, Johnny Cash, and it's about a specific night. Way back in December 4th, 1956, Elvis, Johnny Cash, Jerry Lee Lewis, Carl Perkins, they actually, believe it or not, a lot of people don't realize this, but that's what this story is all about. They gathered at Sun Records, Sam Phillips owning the recording studio in Memphis, for one of the greatest jam sessions of all time. $1 Million Quartet brings that legendary night to life. It's at the Portsmouth Music Hall through Sunday, my friend. And then the tickets are still available. You can get some really great tickets for great shows right through Sunday. You can check out themusichall.org, themusichall.org. And joining me this morning here on the Pulse of New Hampshire, the guy who plays Elvis Presley, Daniel Durston. Dan, good to have you with us, and welcome to the program. Good to have you here.
Hi, happy to be here.
And Nat Zegree is with us. He plays Jerry Lee Lewis. I had a chance to see Nat many years ago. Well, I'm trying to think how many years ago it was. It's got to be at least 5 or 6 years ago at the Ogunquit Playhouse of the $1 Million Quartet. Good to have you with us again.
Thank you, Mike. It's great to be here.
And you've also taken on the role as music director of this one.
Yes, sir. A role that I'm very happy and lucky to have, and it's great. But I tell you what, right off the bat, before anyone gets too impressed with it, it's a pretty easy role to have when you're surrounded by a group of fantastic musicians who do their jobs well enough so that you don't have to work that hard. It's pretty great.
Scott Moreau plays Johnny Cash, and Christopher Wren plays Carl Perkins. And Nat, talk about this night, because so many people don't know this story. If people kind of YouTube this, they'll find some of the music from that night, actually.
Yes.
And that's what this whole show was about, $1 Million Quartet.
Yes.
And not all these guys were well known. The guy that you played, Jerry Lee Lewis, not a lot of people knew him. Right?
That's right. Jerry Lee was right at the very beginning of his infamous career, and he certainly was a nobody at that time. And all of a sudden, he was thrown into the room with three somebodies who were really starting to be huge somebodies, particularly Elvis. And I think, for a 19-year-old kid who's all of a sudden in a room with three guys that he looks up to, it's an incredible perspective for the audience to see, oh, look at him now compared to how we all know Jerry Lee, for better or for worse. And that's one of the great things about this show, is to see all these guys when they're still young and getting started and learning about both their careers and themselves as people. It's incredibly fascinating.
Yeah, and Dan, this has been an incredible year for Elvis, with, of course, the movie Elvis with Austin Butler, who I really thought was going to win the Academy Award, but he got knocked out by the movie The Whale there. But anyway, you've got to be to play Elvis, which you do. You're from Las Vegas. You play in a lot of legend shows. You've taken on the $1 Million Quartet role of Elvis Presley. You've had to be a fan for a long time of the music of Elvis, I would imagine, correct?
Oh, yeah. I lucked out, and I grew up where my dad was a huge Beatles fan. My mom was a huge Elvis fan, so I got the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
Grew up hardcore Beatles fan, and it's because of this show specifically coming out on Broadway that I really dove into the Elvis music to portray it. And once I started studying his music beyond just what we know as his hits, and then learning about his life, I really fell in love with him as a person and a performer.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about what you do. I mean, not only are you the role of Elvis Presley here, but talk about, you're from Las Vegas, correct?
Yeah.
So Vegas, of course, is synonymous with Elvis. Elvis is everywhere in Vegas. So what do you do as far as Elvis impersonations or shows?
Well, ever since doing the national tour of this same show that we're doing here, $1 Million Quartet, I created a career out of it by paying tribute to Elvis in concerts on my own at casinos and stuff like that across the country, and then at Legends in Concert in Las Vegas. And I've been doing it for 6 years now. Yeah.
And Nat, you've been doing Jerry Lee Lewis for quite a long time. I mean, you're back in the role of it again. But you don't do it all the time. You've got your own music, your own shows, your own studios that you're trying to, to try to grow as well, as far as the business goes and as far as your career goes. But you've kept your hand in this show for quite a long time, though, haven't you?
Well, it's actually funny, because this production that we're doing here at the Music Hall, in many ways, is a beautiful kind of full circle moment for me, because the first time I ever played the role of Jerry Lee Lewis was at the Ogunquit Playhouse in 2015, because that was the first ever regional premiere of the production after it closed on Broadway. And so it started there at the Ogunquit Playhouse, and I was I was fortunate enough to be given the chance by Hunter Foster, our director, and Brad Kinney, of course, our fearless leader at the Ogunquit Playhouse. And they gave me that chance all those years ago. And so then when the discussions came up to say, hey, we're thinking of doing the production again, would you like to come back? It really was a kind of full circle moment for me to come back and say, yeah, this is perfect, to come back to the place where it all began and continue that journey.
Isn't it amazing, though, that this night actually happened? It was like the perfect storm of music.
Yeah.
I mean, these artists coming together and jamming.
Yeah.
And I think there's even a CD out of it. There's YouTube stuff you can find about it.
Yeah.
And there's this wonderful picture that Sam Phillips takes of the entire quartet at the end, which becomes this very famous picture, which is really cool.
Well, it's kind of fun because it's in many ways even more relevant today, because we live today in a culture where people are obsessed with crossovers of their favorite movie characters or TV characters or musicians. Collaborations are very exciting for people, and this was a time in history in which that was not really known or heard of. When the Avengers came together for the first time, the whole world lost their minds, and in many ways, these are the Avengers of rock and roll coming together for the first and only time in history in the same place, and it's a chance for people to be a fly on the wall and see how that would have happened, not just from a musical perspective, from a personal perspective. How do these people interact as humans in just conversation? How do their egos match each other? How do their angels and their demons come at each other? It's incredibly interesting, not just from the music perspective, but just from a personal perspective of these four men who everyone knows and loves today, but gets to look back at a time in their lives in which they weren't those people yet.
Absolutely. We're speaking to Nat Zegree, who plays Jerry Lee Lewis, and Dan Durston, who plays Elvis Presley in the production of the $1 Million Quartet, produced by the Ogunquit Playhouse at the Music Hall in Portsmouth. Through Sunday only. It's been a big fun run for these guys, and this is all about the night of December 4th, 1956, when Elvis and Johnny Cash and Jerry Lee Lewis and Carl Perkins got together at Sam Phillips' Sun Records studio in Memphis, and one of the greatest jam sessions of all time. When you look back, Dan, at this particular music, obviously you're younger than this music was at the time, but obviously you know about this music. How important was this music? This was the beginnings of real rock and roll back then.
Yeah, rock and roll didn't even exist before Sam Phillips. So it all started at Sun Records, truly, with these people. So it's super special. And a lot of people don't know, without Sun Records, we don't have a lot today, So if you go and visit Sun Records in Memphis, it's still this small little shack, garage type of thing that hasn't changed much since then. And they can make probably a museum out of it and a huge ordeal out of it, but they don't. And you could still go and walk it, and it's super. It's a big religious experience for me to walk through there, because understanding what came out of that room is why we have what music we have today.
We're going to take a break. More with Dan and Nat, $1 Million Quartet, all coming up here this morning on the Pulse of New Hampshire.